Hello friends, it is Elagatua, and we're back for another replay review, and we've been waiting for this one for quite a long time. This is going to be the review of the finals, the grand finals of the Smacky Cup 4. That's right, it's Smacky Cup 4, not Smacky Cup 3. Somehow the Smacky Cup 4 has finished before Smacky Cup 3 because Smacky Cup 3 had an extra round. All the divisions had like an extra set of players, so that clearly made a huge difference in how long the tournament took, and I think Smacky Cup 3 is going to end up having run 6 months longer than Smacky Cup 4. But anyway, the Smacky Cup 4 is complete, and we're going to be going over the game in this video. And the map for the final round of Smacky Cup 4 is a map called Vandalism, and you're looking at it now. And this thing is quite a lot to take in. There's a lot going on, so we're going to spend probably even more time than usual in our map breakdown because there's a whole lot to talk about. And also, because this map is so complicated, and I never played a map like this or this map before this game, I did a substantial amount of prep, even compared to what I do for a normal game on a map that I haven't played before, because I mean it's the grand finals, so obviously I really want to do well, but there's just like a lot of interesting concepts related to this map that I hadn't seen before, and I wanted to really understand how it could play out. And this map hasn't really been in the rotation for a pretty substantial amount of time. I think it was in the Global League rotation as late as 2022, and I don't know exactly when it was first introduced or if it had been in the rotation before that, but when I looked through the replay archives, that was the time period when Global League games were happening on this map. And I think without further ado, why don't we get into breaking this thing down. So, let's get my cursor ready here. Okay. I've got my drawing program set up now. So let's draw some pretty pictures on this map and figure it out. So we got bases here, here, and here. And this base is your neutral base. So that's going to be the one that you are sending your first infantry to grab. And up here we got them over here. And so immediately, just from looking at the map, you can kind of see that there's three very divided sections of the map. You've got the sides here. You got this huge middle area. And then you've got the other side here. And the reason I'm pointing that out now is because when we look at the reinforced paths, we kind of need to look at the reinforced for every single front, because that's how we need to analyze it. All right. So first of all, let's talk about this base down here. So when we're looking at the reinforced paths, these mountains are kind of relevant. So anything going up to this side is going to have to drive around these mountains, and it looks a little bit formidable, but it's actually not as bad as you might think. So recons are going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But then once you're through that first move and you're on this tile here, you do have this nice set of roads that actually bring you to the center of the map relatively quickly. So that's not too bad. And vehicles, other than the mountains, are totally unobstructed. There's no forests or anything like that. So you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get to this city. And then basically everything is within 3 tank moves. So that's not especially bad either. And interestingly enough, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this airport can be attacked in 3 tank moves from this base as well. So this area is actually, even though it seems like it's very far away, it's relatively quick to get vehicles there. And that's not even taking into account the lander, which we're going to talk about later on. So this base bottom line, it seems like it might be slow to this area here, but it's actually pretty quick. And you do also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got 5 tiles to the port here, and then up to these shoals, it is actually 7. So it's more than 1 tank move to get up to this shoal. So that's an important tidbit for later on as well. But the bottom line is that if you do want to have a lander here, then you're going to be able to load stuff on and kind of boost it up almost an entire tank move, because you can get up to you get the lander up to here with or actually, so that's not right, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm counting as hard. You can get the lander up to here and then unload 1 vehicle onto this tile in a single move from the port, unless you have extra movement on your landers for whatever reason, if you're playing a CO that has that. All right, so that's the rightmost base. Now we got this the starting neutral base. This base is more centralized, but on this side there's a lot of mountains, and so while it may seem like this base has very good access to the center, it's actually very, very obstructed. So if we look at the going to the center, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 already. So while this city is like 2 tank moves from this base is 2 moves to like here. So you can see how painfully obstructed that ends up being if you're just driving along this route here. And then much of the center then is just within 3 tank moves. So if you're going to spend 3 tank moves going somewhere, you can actually get a lot farther on this side than you can driving to the center. And so that's going to be important later on. Driving to the center takes very long. And what this ends up meaning is that this base is often going to be either a base that builds vehicles to get onto the lander, or so infantry obviously can cross these mountains pretty easily, and oftentimes you're getting boosts from the lander, because if you put the lander here, the lander can kind of unload infantry onto this mountain, and then the infantry can kind of run up here relatively obstructed. So if you're building vehicles from this base, generally you're going to be wanting to load them up onto the lander. Otherwise, it's going to be an infantry base, and there's a lot that you can do with infantry. You can send them to the middle. You can also load them onto the lander and send them to the side. There's lots of things that you can do there. All right, other side. So this base here has a relatively unobstructed vehicle path to the center of the map. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but that won't end up mattering a whole lot for the most part. Our lander is over here, and so we've got a shoal and a port here, and so this shoal is 5 away from the base, and this port is 6 away. So if you want to build vehicles and get them into the lander, that's not really going to be much of a problem if you in fact want to do that. If you're looking to get over here, then you got pretty fast reinforced. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So basically, like, this area here is all within 2 tank moves, and then on the other side you had 2 tank moves leading you to be about here. So there's like this area in the center that is going to be well, that's actually not true. So if you go around here, you're getting around the forest, so you can actually get to here or here in a single tank move. And so you can't actually get to this city within 2 tank moves, because it's here and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 even. So the two tank line is basically 2. It's basically there and there on this side, roughly, right? So that gives you a good idea of that. And there's actually pretty serious infantry obstruction on this weak side. You've got these 4 mountains here in this column, and so these double mountains are pretty awful for infantry to go across, because the infantry, you can't go from this base to this mountain. It's too much movement. So you might see a lot of mechs here because the mechs can move across mountains in one move, unlike the regular infantry, and so you can get mechs like up to this comm tower just as quickly as you could with regular infantry, because the infantry can come like here and then make it. But even though the mechs move slower, the mechs can make it just as fast, 1, 2, and 3. So that's an important tidbit for that base. Okay, that covers the basic reinforcement paths for our bases. I will point out that there are ports on either side. They just refuel landers, and they can build naval units. Despite this map having a lot of water and having sea that is basically unobstructed to the opponent's side of the map, you tend not to see naval units built on this map because you do have the pre-deployed lander. So that's just something to keep in mind. We will talk about the landers in tremendous detail later on, but we're going to save that for later on when we talk more about the strategy of this map, because there's really a lot to go over. But ports, they're good for landing stuff onto the lander, and then I think this strong side one is more relevant for loading units up, because you do have the option of loading something up from this base more easily. It's not going to be as easy to land over on these shoals, and then you're refueling. So that's ports. Let's look at airports. Airports are very important on this map. So you have this one on your weak side, which is pretty far forward, but also very exposed, as we mentioned. This tile here is 3 tank moves away from this base. So if you lose sufficient control on your weak side, it is very, very realistic to lock the airport. So that's something to be aware of as well. But the airport is very good for reinforcing this front, as you would imagine, because these properties, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, well, not the comm tower, but this property and obviously this property are both within 1 copter move of this airport. So that makes the copters, in theory, pretty good for helping you secure those cities. Additionally, we have an airport right here in the middle, and this is a very, very far forward airport, and it's a very important tile as well, because you see how far these bases are horizontally away from the center of the map. And even this base, which is like the closest to the center of the map, has a pretty hideous reinforced path to the center as well. So when it comes to securing this area in the middle, the center airport is vastly your best option to projecting power into the center of the map. And you can see from the basic math here, a copter built from this airport can make it all the way to this city and potentially deny captures on this city, which is technically on your opponent's side of the map if you're down at the bottom. So you can see why that might be a useful tile. That being said, even though it's very strong, it's also very far away from the bases. And so the challenge is, look at all these properties kind of that are closer to your bases rather than the airport. And on this side, I mean, this is the neutral base, right? So you're getting an infantry all the way from this guy, and then you're capturing this base, and then an infantry would have to come all the way over here. So because it's so far away from all the bases, oftentimes this airport is not going to come online until a lot later in the game. And so despite it being powerful, a lot of times in the early game, it's not that much of a factor, because it's going to be day 7 or day 8 if you're playing a very efficient capture line before this airport actually comes online to help you fight in the center. Additionally, both airports are so close to each other that this line here in the center, I mean, so this property and this property, they're both 1 airport move away. So it is a little bit of kind of a copter knife fight, because it's very challenging to get vehicles into the center due to the reinforced path, things that we talked about already. So a lot of times your best weapon against copters is just going to be your copters. And copters are well, they're glass cannons, right? So things can get very swingy in the center if fights start to break out there, because a lot of it just hinges on who has copters in position and who has more copters in position to be able to swing the fight very dramatically towards one player or the other. All right, we can mention HQs. HQ relatively far back here, though it is positioned on the weak side. HQs can, in theory, become a factor, but generally the map has to be tilting pretty strongly towards one player for the HQs to be relevant. We'll get more into that a little bit later on when we talk about the map dynamics. And I think that covers everything except for the comm towers. So these comm towers are incredibly important on this map. These are super, super, super exposed because you have these mountains behind them, which means that you can't put vehicles kind of directly adjacent to the comm tower. So the vehicles are going to be coming, you know, from this side, and then they're going to have kind of direct access to fighting the infantry on the comm towers here. Additionally, you've got this forest tile, which is directly in place to be able to deny, to like lock the comm tower with artillery, or even if you want to put an artillery here, that's also pretty good, because then you can put an infantry or some vehicle in this forest and then have the city kind of wall off access to an artillery here and be able to deny captures of the comm tower that way. So the comm tower is safe if you're early enough, but we're looking at this replay and you can already see that it's day 7 and the infantry that was sent to go after this comm tower got popped by a recon very, very early on. And as you can imagine, fighting over the comm towers is going to be a very major part of this map. Okay. That, I think, covers the map, at least the bare fundamentals. But we have so much more to talk about when it comes to just the map breakdown, because this map it's very complicated. The dynamics of this map are very, very complicated, and we're going to spend a lot of time breaking it down, and we're going to go through a bunch of different replays. This map is really hard to plan for, and it's even kind of difficult to analyze. So I'm gonna pause this replay, and let's try and break down what is contested and talk about that as an intro to thinking about how this map tends to play out in practice. So our main contested properties can be this city, the comm tower, everything in the middle, and then these two. These are the primary contested properties. That's 8, which is a lot for a map. Many maps only have 4 or 6 contested properties. This map has 8, and frankly, there's even more contested properties than that, because this map is called Vandalism, but if I had to describe it in one word, I would call it volatile. Okay, this map, the fronts are extremely swingy, extremely snowbally, and overextending. The traditional rules don't apply as much as they would on other maps when it comes to overextending. What tends to happen is, like, for example, this center area, there's 4 properties in the center here. You might think, oh, it splits down the middle and one player gets 2 properties and the other player gets 2 properties. Well, that's not what happens in practice generally. What happens generally is one player wins the center fight and they get all of them. That's generally what happens. And oftentimes, if they win the center fight hard enough, they actually have momentum to be able to continue pushing into this property and potentially even threatening this airport. Because once you've lost the center area, you give up this vision and this vision, and you can see a tremendous amount of the map, or even like this mountain, right? So you see like a ton of stuff. And if you get the center and you get a recon on this tile or this tile, you can see the airport. So it's very different from many maps where if you extend, you're kind of putting yourself in danger of having stuff pop out that is going to wreck your army if you just stray a little bit too far. And this map, as soon as you control the center, you can see all the landing zones on either side. So if anything's going to pop out of lander, you're going to see it generally before it has a chance to move and ruin your day. Or if there's going to be reinforcements from the airport, oftentimes you can see it get deployed the turn before it's able to move and react accordingly. So the effect of the fog in the center is kind of diminished once you have control over it. And that allows you to make it's very easy to make good decisions about whether you're strong enough to push beyond the center and into these kind of secondary contested properties, because you're going to know whether you're strong enough as long as you control the vision. So that's very unusual for a fog map. And I've covered many maps where we've drawn these lines at the 2-tank move line, and I've said, like, you really don't want to extend past that line, because if you do, you're activating a lot of your opponent's reinforcements and you're likely to swing the fight against yourself. Though that way of thinking does not necessarily apply on this map, and that's what makes it so different than a traditional fog map that we've seen kind of a lot of our principles applied to in the past. So that's very interesting. So that's talking about the middle. The middle is very swingy, but also the sides are extremely swingy as well. And this is a dynamic that we've seen actually in another map pretty recently. We talked about is all gillied up. That was the Smacky Cup 5 round 2 map. And we can take a peek at that map for a second. We're not going to retread a lot of ground here, but I just want to illustrate something for you before we talk any further. So this map was characterized, you have 2 bases on your strong side, and you have this one base over here that's on the weak side with a very exposed airport as well. And we talked about in this replay review how the strong side is so strong that actually your primary plan should just be to attack very aggressively into the weak side and kind of bleed it out. And then on your weak side, you just want to try and like survive as long as possible, because the strong side is able to project so much power that the weak side really can't hope to ever win. It just needs to hope to survive. So that's really the only thing I wanted to illustrate here. So now that we're back on Vandalism, hopefully you can look at this and see that even though the map layouts are extremely different, you can see the same principle at play here. You've got these 2 bases very close together and very isolated from the other side of the map. And this is your strong side. And then you've got a weak side base that's very far away, supported by a very exposed airport. And then you've got a central airport that comes online later on. So all of this should seem very familiar if you looked at that other map. But this is even more extreme than all gillied up, because there is absolutely no way for you to get any infantry from this side over to this front. I mean, obviously it's not like impossible, but it's very impractical, and in reality it's never ever going to happen. So what this means is that you are intensely infantry starved on your weak side, because the second that attacks start happening over here against you, there's a good chance that you're going to be needing to build vehicles from your base here. Additionally, you can build mechs, but these mechs are not really going to be used for capturing most of the time, except for this comm tower, because they can't really extend. They're kind of locked to this mountain range, right? Which makes them very sticky, but also as soon as they get off this mountain range, they're extremely vulnerable. So even if you're building mechs, your capture power on this front is extraordinarily limited. And basically you have this window of time in the early game where your opponent doesn't have vehicles on this side where you need to land grab. And to land grab as much as possible, because as soon as the vehicles show up, then it's very hard to regain momentum, and especially hard to regain map control to basically ever hold on to these areas long enough to be able to capture them. Because, I mean, maybe with the comm tower you can get mechs there, but like this property, like forget about it. You're never going to be able to keep enemy units out of this area. It's totally impractical to be able to have infantry survive out there off of that one base. So it's the same idea as all gillied up. Your strong side is very, very strong, and your weak side is very, very weak. And the middle is extremely contested. And so this makes things very, very volatile because there are so many objectives out on the map, and it is not possible to commit to all of them at the same time. You want to be able to commit to the middle because there's 4 properties here. And so if you control all the middle, that's going to be potentially a 4K lead if the sides split evenly, which is really, really substantial. But at the same time, you're so vulnerable on your weak side, and there's a lot of pressure for you to push on your strong side. And the danger is that if you commit too much to this center area, then your opponent is going to be able to push on your weak side with a lot more stuff, and you're going to lose your comm tower. And then if you've also committed too much stuff to the middle, you're not going to have enough stuff to be able to push your opponent's side, and they're going to keep their comm tower. And then what happens is you're up maybe 4K from the center properties, but then you lose like this property on both sides, and then you lose your comm tower on both sides. And then it's not 4K. Now you're up 2K, but you're down 2 comm towers. And in many matchups, that is a big problem. So that means that you can't just commit everything to the center. So you have to strike a really delicate balance between offense over here, trying to get the lucrative properties in the middle, and not dying on your weak side. And that's what makes this map very interesting. And that's kind of the fundamental dynamics of this map and why there's so many options, because all you need to control the center is just to have a little bit more stuff than your opponent. Because as soon as you win the infantry fight, you're basically golden. So you kind of want as few vehicles in the middle as possible, except slightly more than your opponent has. And how do you do that in practice? Well, it's really tricky, because you don't know how much your opponent's going to commit to the middle either. If your opponent commits everything to the middle, then and you commit almost everything in the middle, then you could end up getting wiped out and not have enough to win the sides. But if your opponent commits a lot, then that gives you the green light to push on the sides, and you're probably going to end up winning both sides that way. And you could have a really chaotic game where your opponent is maybe pushing into these secondary properties, and you're pushing into, like, you know, the weak side properties up here in the corner, and things can get really, really crazy really fast. So there's a lot of possibility for chaos, and I mentioned volatility. I think that's a really good word for this map. It's very, very volatile. Now, just in case we didn't have enough volatility on this map, I think now is the time to start talking about the pre-deployed landers, because you have landers on both of these channels here, and you have free reign to try and go to the other side of the map and cause havoc. And this is another reason why this map is very volatile, and it's a big reason why this map is incredibly difficult to plan for. On many maps, I'm able to make a capture plan for the first 7 or 8 days, and I can pretty much stick to that no matter what happens, with maybe some accommodation for what happens if a day 3 recon shows up or something like that. You know, obviously there's like an escape hatch there if you get some early aggression. This map is not like that, because the landers can show up on the other side of the map by day 3. And so by day 3, if you have some sort of plan that involves ferrying units out to different parts of the map using the lander, well, your opponent has the power to potentially disrupt that and kind of disrupt your plans and force you to change, and there's really nothing you can do about it if they choose to play that way. So I think now what I want to do is let's take a look at all of the different kind of early game scenarios that you might see with a lander and talk about how they affect the game. So for the first scenario, we're going to look at the game that we've been kind of watching as we've been explaining everything. This is the port block scenario. Now, I kind of think both players misplayed this a little bit, but we're going to look at it anyway, because this is still a thing that can happen. So player 1 gets to move first. And we see the landers kind of go to the center. And so what often happens is your weak side lander, this lander is generally the harassing lander. And the strong side lander is going to be your defensive lander, or the lander that you more likely want to utilize to be able to ferry units out. And the reason for that is because it's so close to this base, and because there's a lot of stuff that you can get by getting infantry out to this area. You can accelerate these caps very, very quickly. Additionally, you get out to like this square, then you can put infantry here to get to here. If you get to this square, you can get infantry on the mountain, which can see a whole lot of information about what your opponent is doing and their captures and things like that. So there's a lot to be gained from using the lander on your strong side. But at the same time, if you look at the geography of the map here, there is this tile right here that is a single tile choke point. And so if your opponent gets a lander here, then your lander is going to be stuck in this 3 tile area until either their lander leaves or until you blast it off with an artillery or something like that. So on the other side, that choke does not exist. So you can see there's no way to block in a lander completely because there's no choke point. So that makes the strong side lander lucrative, but also vulnerable to getting locked down. So what happens in this scenario is that the harassing lander comes in and actually gets behind the lander of the strong side player. And so now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the lander can technically come back into here, but the problem is vision. So now we're on the next turn. So this lander kind of saw the other lander go by, but doesn't know exactly where it stopped, because it could be stopped like here or here. So you could try to get the lander back, but you don't really have a safe way to do that necessarily. So what ends up happening is they just both decide, up, we're just going to sit on each other's ports. And so that's what happens. And it is kind of weird. So I think that Sidewinder kind of misplayed here by going for this cap. I think this cap could have been better, because basically, I mean, I guess maybe Sidewinder thought that the lander was going to end up just on the port the previous turn. But if you send the infantry this way, then next turn you can actually just property skip to here and do like the 2-for-1 thing. And then you deny blocking the port, and also you're not really costing yourself any long-term income by doing that. But instead, and then Kantbei, I think, makes the same mistake. Like, this infantry could actually come up here, and you can do a 2-for-1 that way and prevent it. But anyway, none of that happens. And so what ends up happening instead is that both players just end up sitting on each other's ports, kind of amusingly. So this is one thing that happens, where now they're blocking each other's ports, so you can't capture it until artillery comes along to force it to leave. So that's scenario 1. And in this scenario, this really slows down the game a lot, because you know that there's not going to be a lot of units getting ferried to the center because all the landers are occupied. So you know that nothing's getting moved, and your opponent knows that nothing's getting moved. And so things like the combat kind of gets delayed in that case for a couple of days compared to normal, and actually reduces the volatility a lot of the game because there's so many options for what you can do with the lander that if you kind of take them out of the equation, it is going to reduce the number of options that you have to prepare against and makes things a little bit more predictable. Okay, so that's one option, and you can kind of see how this plays out. Artillery shows up to kind of force him to leave, and then he leaves, and he's at 4 HP, and then on the other side, it's forced a weak side artillery, and a copter comes out, and then ultimately that ends up getting trapped. Here you can see it getting trapped, so it can't escape, and it ends up getting sacrificed. This is not really a good option. You really want to keep your strong side lander alive because it's much more valuable to you. If you're going to sacrifice a lander, sacrificing the weak side lander is definitely the way to go because oftentimes it's something that you can use to kind of like see in these forests, for example. But because this area is so vulnerable because your weak side is so weak, you can't really drop units off there because you need to like control the area before you can drop units off there safely, and that's never really going to happen. So oftentimes there's not that much for this lander to do. You could shuttle infantry maybe to the center as well, but infantry are going to take 2 moves to get to a place where they can be loaded in from the weak side, and also you really need all of your weak side infantry to be fighting over here. You can't really spare any for the center without crippling your weak side even further. So if you want to sack a lander, sack your weak side lander, and if you're going to harass with the lander, harass with your weak side lander. That's the bottom line there. Okay, so that's one option. So next we're going to look at this game between Go7 and Tordread, and I think this is kind of the quintessential lander play on this map, where basically what you can do is you can put your lander and your strong side here in the choke. And by putting your lander here in the choke, you basically guarantee that your opponent is not going to be able to come in and block your port and mess up your capture game. But at the same time, putting your lander here means that you're also not going to be ferrying out any units. This shoals here is 2 lander moves away from your opponent's starting position. So what ends up happening here, as you can see, is now it's day 3. So because you put the lander here, you see the weak side lander of your opponent because it's next to your lander, and you know where it is. And you kind of also know that you can't really leave. And that also gives you the green light to be like, okay, well, I'll probably need to do the same thing to you. So we've got the landers kissing here in the center, and then they're going to kind of try and play to block each other, and you have kind of this weird kind of game of chicken going on where this lander is going to be sitting on places that he wants to try and prevent the lander from unloading from. And so this is something that you can see where, okay, like this lander is here, and sometimes you can see the lander put here to block a lander from coming over here and then unloading. Or you can put like your lander here, your weak side lander here or here to try and block unloads onto those sides, thinking that if your opponent doesn't have vision, you might actually be able to trap their lander by putting your lander in the place that they want to unload. And if they get stuck then on the C tile, well, then they've got units in their lander that they can't do anything with, and it's going to delay them by a turn at least, which could potentially be pretty disruptive to mess up their capture plans and things like that. So there's a lot of different dynamics that can happen with this, and a lot of risk, because if you manage to guess what your opponent is doing, or if your opponent is not playing safe and getting vision of the tiles that they want to unload on, then there's opportunities for you to put your lander in a smart place and really disrupt your opponent without any risk to you. And so you can see here, now we got the lander on this shoals, and so this is a useful tile for the lander because now this infantry can get ferried onto the mountain, which gets you to this city a little bit faster. Or actually, the infantry can go here instead. So it doesn't really get you that city more quickly, but it does get you here, which gets you here, which then gets you to here. So it does speed up at least one capture. So even if your lander does get trapped here by getting locked in the choke, at least it is still going to get some value, but your opponent's going to know that they're going to be a little bit safer over here, because the only thing that's going to be harassing these cities is going to be potentially like a recon from this base. But your opponent also has to build an artillery to make your lander go away, so it's less likely that you're going to get harassed. So this is probably the standard play that you're going to see on this map, where doing this, it forces the artillery out, and then that gives you more time on your weak side to try and lock down these properties that are going to end up going to be under a lot of pressure, because your opponent has to put those resources towards the artillery and not some sort of harassment. Okay. So now we've got the last option. And this last option is the free-for-all, do whatever you feel like, not gonna harass option. So this means that both players are basically gonna not use their landers to harass beyond the first couple of turns here. And that means that they're gonna start loading stuff from both sides of their map and get into the center very, very quickly. And so you can see infantry showing up in the center of the map very early on. And you see a lot of harass on the weak side, because there's no need to buy an artillery early on to be able to free the choke here. So this means that this recon comes out quickly and is able to deny this comm tower for a while, which is pretty unfortunate. And you see access to the center now is sped up pretty dramatically. You already see fighting in the center on day 7, and that's because these landers are shuttling units into the middle and shuttling units here very aggressively. All of a sudden, it's day 8, and there's 3 vehicles already on this strong side pushing this weak side. So you can see the volatility of this option. If you just let the landers be free to do whatever they want, then the fighting can break out very, very early, and things get pretty, it's not clowny necessarily, but it is very volatile, because you're getting interactions. It kind of amplifies the rock, paper, scissors a little bit, because whatever vehicle choices you're making early on, you're going to see the consequences of those choices very, very quickly, compared with the other options that at least limit the possibilities, and so it gives you a little bit more time to develop in a more predictable style. Okay, I think that covers the majority of the lander dynamics. I think next, the best thing to do is we're just gonna shuffle through a couple of old replays at lightning speed, for me at least, just to get a very high level picture of how these games tend to play out. Because I think that it's important, and this is a good thing to do if you're looking at a new map and you don't really, you want to get like a quick idea of just like kind of the basics and how all the fronts play out. So we're just going to zoom through this, and we're going to see very quickly what happens. We see that one player is winning the middle, and the other player is winning both of the sides here. So one player's got a comm tower, one player doesn't, but one player is getting all the properties in the middle. And once the middle's been taken, you can see it's kind of like an infestation. It's very, very difficult for the other player to make any ground here into the middle. This area is totally on lockdown. And actually, this is really, really spicy to be able to extend this far on your weak side. That's generally not something that tends to happen. And you see it got exactly what it deserved, because the weak side is just not strong enough to push that far out, and it gets absolutely clobbered. And frankly, the other side kind of got clobbered too, so they both kind of made the same mistake. And now that kind of all the trading has begun, you can see that there's so much here in the center that already the player with the possession of the center is starting to push into these secondary properties, because there's so much stuff here on both of the sides. As you see, like this it feels like it's crazy overextended, and it is to some degree, but still, like this player is not losing any of the center properties. So now you see, this is, I guess, the punishment. If you go too far in the center and you start losing all your stuff, then you get clobbered on the sides here. And now this is kind of like the death condition, right? Where you've lost both of the sides and you've got those 4 center properties. So you're up by 2K, but you're down 2 comm towers. And that's usually going to be a situation that you can't recover from. And eventually then that transitions into losing the center as well, and that kind of ends the game. All right. We got another game. This is a Javier versus Javier match. Javier is an interesting choice on this map. We haven't talked about the COs at all, but because the comm towers are so contested, Javier has a very realistic win condition on this map, or a loss condition, frankly, where 2-tower Javier is basically going to win the game immediately, and 0-tower Javier is probably going to be losing the game immediately as well. So that is definitely a choice that you are able to make on this map. So Javier more realistic than other as a choice than in other maps. As you can see in this matchup, there's a lot of fighting over the comm towers because both players are very aware that playing 1 comm tower versus 0 in a Javier mirror is a very, very strong position. But it does end up stabilizing with Sidewinder having some trouble getting that comm tower at first, but is able to lock it down eventually. And then this game gets absolutely wild. The center actually kind of stays split for quite some time, which is pretty unusual. And yeah, there's a lot of center fighting here. It's actually kind of strange. I think they've kind of handshaken the sides more than I expected, and there's a lot more center fighting here. But now finally, so now this is like the strong side breakthrough, right? Like this is always going to happen eventually. You start fighting on these sides enough, eventually the strong side is going to kind of cripple the weak side player just through attrition, because there's just a limit on the number of units you can build over there from that one base side. But doing this means the center is lost. And I don't know if this is actually going to be able to work out. Yeah, it seems like Kantbei is starting to bleed out a little bit. So center starts to swing back. Does lose the comm tower. So this is 2-tower Javier, but the age-old question: at what cost is 2-tower Javier strong enough? Given I look at how much it costs. It costs it's a 4K difference in income, and also 10 unit count and a lot of army value. So normally, getting to 2 towers would be enough to just kind of win, but I think Orange Star is so far behind that it might not matter. Yeah, and so now able to get that 1 comm tower back, although I mean took a beating in the process. Got to close that gap a lot, but then once the tower's back, then it's pretty much over. So you can see the dynamics, right? Like as soon as one player shifts very heavily to the sides, it opens up the middle to get attacked from the other player potentially. And then once you win the middle, it makes you vulnerable on the sides because you're putting your reinforcements there. And then the weak side and the strong side here. The strong side tends to push in very, very deep. Even like this is, you're really close to 1 turn reinforce from the base, but the strong side is still able to push in here. And last, we're going to look at this. This is a pretty short one. This is between Tordread and Starflash. This is another lander port block game. Kind of silly. You can see there's some early copters here, and then what ends up happening is a big kind of copter engagement in the center. You see a lot of copters early from Starflash, and also from Tordread as well. And a lot of vehicles end up going to the middle. So like you can decide to send a lot of vehicles towards the center, and as long as your opponent also kind of has the same idea, then it's okay. But it only plays out this way because both players have kind of chosen to handshake the sides. You can see very little commitment with vehicles on either side, and they're both deciding mostly just to fight in the center here. So Starflash takes pretty dominant control of the center here, but what happened is that Tordread actually was setting a trap here, and so this ends up being a pretty devastating counterattack. Losing a lot of vehicles there, and that's even just a crippling blow. You can see that's like a 20k swing, and in an Andy mirror, if you lose that many units, then your hyper repair value is getting decimated pretty hard. So that's actually just kind of a death blow in itself. So sometimes games can be like that, where you can kind of set a trap, and because the engagements are so copter heavy, it ends up being very volatile and over very quickly. Okay, we're finally to the moment some of you have been waiting for. We're going to start looking at the actual game in question here, but before we actually get there, we are going to spend a moment to talk about the COs. And for this grand finals match, this was a new tier 2 matchup plus Javier. So kind of a unique tier, although as has been the case pretty frequently recently, this game ends up going into a Von Bolt mirror. I will explain the logic from my side. So my logic was this center area, if you just look at the terrain here, it's super, super high defense. And with the maps that we looked at already, at least the replays we looked at, we saw that once you gain dominance over the center, it's very, very hard to dislodge. And for me, I'm looking at that and thinking, as Von Bolt, that would be even more exacerbated because Von Bolt gets the extra defense and the infantry are so strong that if you win the infantry fight mid, then it's going to be very difficult for you to ever lose that kind of position. So I wanted to have the extra defense, and that kind of eliminated Olaf and Eagle for me as options, because I was afraid that those COs would get punished very quickly and very decisively in any sort of engagement for the middle. I also considered Javier a lot, and I actually think that Javier in this setup would be very viable. This is more of a, I guess, like a comfort pick somewhat, especially because in this map I am player 2, and I don't really think there's like an FTA issue with this map necessarily, but player 1 does have more harassing lines from this base into the comm tower. And so as Javier, the one thing you can't have happen is you can't let your opponent deny your comm tower, especially because you're likely to be playing into a Von Bolt. So you can't afford to get in that situation. If you lose that extra plus 10 attack and plus 10 defense, there's no way that you're ever going to be able to get your comm tower, and the whole map is going to snowball. So you have a very kind of very glaring vulnerability from the start of the map, and you have to sacrifice potentially some income in your capture order to be able to get an infantry to the city very quickly before Von Bolt is going to be able to harass you, so that you basically avoid losing the game in the first 5 days or so. So as player 1, you don't have to send your first infantry there necessarily. You can kind of send one of the later infantry there, maybe by day 2 or day 3, to get the comm tower and still be relatively safe from any sort of recons that show up and try to disrupt that. But as player 2, you're looking at like I think you have to send your first infantry to guarantee being able to lock it down without any risk of the day 3 recon. And that's pretty punishing to lose that much income to be able to just run right there to avoid losing the game immediately. So I opted for Von Bolt as player 2, but if I had to do this again and I was player 1, there's a decent chance I might go for Javier, because you do have that win condition available to you, where if you ever get that other comm tower, you're basically going to win as long as you're not crippled, and you can still fight pretty decently in the center of the map with just your 10-10, even against Von Bolt, which if Von Bolt gets the comm tower is going to be 20-10 against you, because you do have the CO powers are going to come online much more early for Javier, and they're actually stronger because they're going to boost you to 30-30 bonuses on your COP turns, which is pretty substantial, because then you get the 20-20, because you 10-10 from the comm tower, and that's double 20-20, and then your CO power bonus of 10-10 as well added on there for 30-30. So your CO powers come on very early, and they're very, very strong, and I think that definitely makes fighting against a 20-10 Von Bolt very strong. And additionally, this map is very good for artillery. We talked about how artillery can lock the comm towers very easily. Javier's resistant to artillery. There's a 20% defense buff against ranged attacks as Javier, so that's quite good, and that obviously gets raised when the CO power happens, and so that can be very useful in a situation where you are trying to capture your opponent's comm tower. You can basically make an infantry immune to ranged attack for a single turn, and that might be the turn you need to actually to get that, especially if you could control like one of these two tiles with infantry and just sit them on there, and there's just no way that anything's going to break through if you've got that CO power activated. But again, it comes with the risk of, if you don't get that comm tower at the beginning, you could just be dying. So I am going with Von Bolt in this matchup, and one of the other reasons why I'm going with Von Bolt in this matchup is because my plan going into this match is to really focus on the center. And not necessarily focus on the center with a lot of vehicles, but I've kind of put together a unique build order that I've not seen anybody else try on this map, but I thought would be pretty good, where I'm basically going to rush over to the center airport by using this lander on the port here. And so I'm going to send my first infantry here, and then I'm going to unload it to here to boost it to basically get to this airport one turn sooner. And doing this requires my weak side lander, which actually means that we talked about like all the different things that the lander can do. My weak side lander is going to have to wait on the port for 2 turns in order to make that happen. So my harassing lander is going to be occupied for a little bit, and I'm not going to be able to block the other lander at the choke like I might want to do. So this kind of resigns me to potentially a very volatile game, because I'm not going to be able to bottle up the strong side lander, and the weak side lander could potentially kind of bottle me up, and then also get at least one unload on the strong side before my lander is able to reach the choke. So that's the initial plan. But before we kind of get beyond that, I think I probably should take a moment to introduce my opponent. Opponent is LaskaLarnar. And LaskaLarnar is making their second appearance in the grand finals of a Smacky Cup. And if you've seen my other videos, I covered the grand finals of the Smacky Cup 2, which was a match between LaskaLarnar and Rip. And if you've not seen that game, that is a really, really good game. It was played on Chosen Reservoir, and it was very exciting and a very high-level game, and absolutely worthy of a Smacky Cup final. So definitely check that out if you want to see more of my opponent in this game. But so this is going to be the second Grand Finals appearance for them, and I'm in 2 Grand Finals, but this is going to be the first Grand Finals that I've ever played. So I guess technically my opponent has an experience advantage, and my opponent has actually played on this map before a couple of times. There were some old Global League games that I got to look at. I think my opponent is vastly stronger than they were back in 2022 when those games were played. So I didn't read too much into those replays, because a lot can change in 3 years, as I myself am evidence of. having improved tremendously since they started, I think, in 2023, I think is when I made my account, something like that. So I've been doing this for, 2.5 years or so. I've gotten a lot better. So is my opponent. And so my opponent is also going Von Bolt. And I looked through the old replays that my opponent played, and it did seem like my opponent never really liked to do the lander harassment and used the landers mostly just for ferrying stuff around and not really trying to block any chokes or anything like that. So it's really hard to draw too much from old replays like that because it's been so long. But there's something in my mind, and also I'm thinking that the center is going to be a very strong area of the map. So my opponent may also think that as well. So I'm kind of bracing for potentially some very big fights in the center of the map, and that's what my build is going to be focused around. But we'll kind of talk about things as we go, because on this map you really have to take things day by day, because if landers show up and they block your chokes, then whatever you had planned the previous turn might not be an option. You have to change your whole plan around. So it's very hard to plan. So let's get into the game proper. We've reached the hour point, so that's like the standard time we start the game. So I'm gonna be doing standard stuff here. Not gonna be moving the lander. I'll move the lander into the choke just to see if on day 2 the lander shows up here, because this will be the turn that I would see the lander next to me if it's gonna harass. So it's kind of crazy. Day 2, and you're already gonna potentially be getting some information about what your opponent has in mind. So going to be doing some, well, it looks standard so far. We do not see the lander show up as well, so that's something to keep in mind. So no lander showing up next to us, which means that the lander could be potentially trying to block access to the center of the map. They could be trying to prevent us from unloading, or they could potentially be using the lander themselves on their side of the map for some shenanigans too. But it's probably not sitting there doing nothing, that's for sure. Landers do have 99 fuel, so they have a lot more fuel than the black boats, which means harassing with the lander is not really going to cause any fuel issues. So there's no reason really not to do it unless you have something else in mind for your lander. So we're going to finish our caps here on day 3. And now this is no longer normal because we've used our first infantry in the lander to move him over to this airport. And now this frees our lander to start moving out on the map. And so we're going to, now that he has done his job, he is now going to rush out onto the map, and we're going to start doing some harass as best as we can. Seeing no lander come here, we are going to actually take a risk ourselves, because this infantry now, we have the ability to kind of get him out on the map more quickly. And I don't know when his lander could potentially show up, but we're going to try and see if we can get away with getting an infantry out here onto the map without getting blocked, since we haven't seen the lander. But this is definitely risky, and it's absolutely possible that the lander could have slipped in here last turn without us knowing, and if that happens, then we're going to get blocked here, and it's going to be really, really painful. And there's no way to mitigate this risk. So normally if you're trying to ferry units out, you might want to go like here, take this awkward path here to, so at least if you bonk into a lander here, you're on this tile, so you can just unload the infantry and not lose a turn of captures. But if we want to get the infantry here, because we want to get this property more quickly. And I mean, there's a couple of options, right? Like we could go here as well to try and accelerate these caps as well. So as I mentioned in the map review, there's so much lucrative stuff that you can do with this lander if you actually have access on the strong side to get it out on the map. But our game plan is very focused around the center, at least initially. So we're actually going to opt to unload it here very early on and go for this city, which is going to allow us to have an infantry and unit in the position to potentially transition into some more center caps later on. First, we move our lander up here, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to block a square that our opponent has attempted to unload on in their previous games. We can't get all the way to here to block this. We could only get to here, which is not really ideal. So instead of going all the way to here this turn, we're actually just going to leave it here instead, in the hopes that our opponent is ferrying infantry to here. And then we would be blocking it. And if we block it here, then infantry would have to get unloaded here and here, which is not ideal because it's not going to be any faster to this city here. So that's the goal. And unfortunately, if we don't see anything happen, we won't really know if our harass had any effect. But we did see our opponent on day 5 build recons from this base in order to get vision of here to see if this was a safe area to unload on. So there's not really much risk on my end, but it's kind of unlikely to have any effects, but we're just doing it because it is something that we can do with the lander, and then we have the option to go and block the choke next turn if we want. So we just go for it, and we are not blocked, which is a huge relief. And it's especially a huge relief because in future turns, we're going to have vision of the choke area, and it will be less risky. Like, we'll know if the lander shows up to block us. But this turn was totally blind, and so if we had gotten blocked, it would have been really, really bad for our opening. So given that this has gone successfully, we're going to continue just to pump out infantry. One of the reasons why I wanted to play as Von Bolt is because I'm focusing the center at the expense of focusing my weak side a little bit. We took this infantry that is normally doing captures like in here or maybe here, and we're sending them directly to the center of the map, which means we need to actually allocate more infantry than usual from this base to the center. So we're going to be even weaker than usual on the weak side. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to play as Von Bolt. Von Bolt with the 1010, it's like, even if my comm tower gets denied really, really hard, which is definitely possible because I'm basically risking that with my opener, 1010 is still playable, even against 2010 from if my opponent gets the comm tower. So you can play down a comm tower as Von Bolt, and it's still like, I mean, it doesn't feel great, but it is okay. You're going to lose the ability to clear off infantry from cities with like a recon and an infantry. That's really the biggest thing that you're sacrificing. But most of the fights are not really going to be hugely affected by that. And now we're going to get a mech on day 4 here. And this mech's job is to come up here and potentially go for the comm tower. And the reason why you would use a mech instead of an infantry is that the infantry has to path around here and then go like this, and then it's here on this square, which is very vulnerable because from this base, a 2 recon move puts the recon here, which can see an infantry here, which means that it can be harassed very easily from an early recon. And then also you don't get vision from the mountain. So if there's like an artillery waiting for you here or infantry waiting for you getting unloaded from the lander over here, you're basically walking into a trap with no information. But with the mech, you're still getting there in the same number of turns, but you're able to use this mountain and then this mountain, and this mountain can see both of these squares. And also you're not making a blind leap onto the comm tower, right? So if like the recon gets on the comm tower, then the mech's going to know in advance. And if the mech gets on the comm tower and starts capturing it, a recon by itself is not really going to be able to remove your mech. The recon will attack into the mech, but the mech can kind of counterattack into the recon as well with the remaining life. And I don't think the mech will win the fight outright, but it'll basically end up being a trade, more or less. So this is kind of a unique situation where we're going to be using the mech to capture stuff. Anyway, seeing nothing, feeling pretty free that we can move our lander back to our side. And now we're gonna start to have money. We've got a lot of money saved up because we've only been building infantry in the mech. So we're gonna be able to mix in some recons now to get out on the board. Let's see. I had a plan here. Oh, yes, my plan. So I could have moved this lander up here to block this choke. That was definitely an option. But what I'm really thinking about doing is I'm thinking 2 turns ahead here. I want to actually be able to get the lander back to here because I'm anticipating being really weak on this side. We just talked about that. And so one of the ways that I am trying to mitigate being really weak on this side is that I'm actually going to use this area back here, which is blocked off by the mountains, and I'm going to put an artillery in there. And the artillery is there because I'm so weak here, I'm worried that my opponent actually might get this comm tower. And so I need a way to defend against that very safely so that I can commit stuff to the center early and then stall my losses on this side long enough that I can either consolidate the center and then build up forces over here to potentially fight on this side. So getting artillery back here is a very, very strong way. You're going to be locking this comm tower for sure, but it doesn't necessarily help you capture it because if an artillery of your opponent shows up here, well, you can't really do anything about that. But at least you're not giving it up yourself. So the bottom line is that I need to go here, not really because I care about looking in this forest, although this is nice just to make sure that like no early artillery got dropped off here or something like that, or an artillery moved in. Really, he's just here because he needs to be able to reach this tile next turn. So that's why that's happening. Because we're planning to build the artillery on our weak side. And so now we've got a recon of our own. We build the recon before we move the lander so that we just make sure it's pretty unlikely that the other lander could have slipped behind here out of our vision, but there's no reason not to be safe if you have the option to be safe just by doing things in the correct order. And we have to move the lander here because we want to pick up this infantry from this base and be able to ferry this recon and the infantry together towards the center of the map. And the idea here, the original plan here is actually, so we finished this airport cap, so now we get this airport online really, really early compared to what most people do on this map, and we actually want to build a T-copter. It'll be more evident next turn when you see what the income turns out to be. So this turn we've got 13K, and so the plan that we're thinking about going for is we're going to build artillery here, which is 6K, T-copter here, which is 5K, and then 2 infantry here. That's the plan. We've kind of optimized all the income to be able to set up for this turn, and with this really early T-copter, we're basically going to boost this infantry to the center. And so a lot of times on this map, if you're focusing on the sides, especially on your weak side, a lot of times you build like an early tank on the weak side to defend against any harass. And so I'm trying to play against that perception by committing absolutely nothing on the strong side yet and hoping that my opponent will play defensively over here and they'll be able to get these properties for free without me doing anything. But any sort of commitment over here is not going to be able to fight anything either because I'm not going to have any stuff for it to attack. So it's just going to be very isolated over here. That's the hope. And then by the time their normal infantry gets to the center, I'm going to have so many infantry in here and I've captured these properties that I'm going to be very difficult to dislodge. So that's the thinking behind the T-copter build. Now this is the kind of the critical turn, right? Because this is where we build it. So let's do everything in order and let's see what happens. So first of all, we're always going to be loading in our recon in here, and then we pop out the recon here, and what? Well, that is not what I expected to see here. So everything I just said, forget about it. So when I saw this, I was like, well, all right, we need to pause. And I'm thinking, how is this stuff here? Forget about whether it's bad or not. I just want to understand, like, I was not expecting stuff to be there. Obviously, I have nothing on the corresponding side here. So my opponent must have done something special and unique to be able to get all this stuff here. And so what I realized is that, as I kind of did things with the move planner, so the city is captured, and it's my opponent's finished day 6, which means the capture finished on day 6 and was started on day 5, which means the infantry had to be unloaded on day 4, which means the infantry had to be moving into the lander on day 4 as well. So this is actually the day 1 infantry that went here, and then on day 4 moved onto the lander here and then got unloaded here. That's the only way for this capture to be completed. It's like there's literally no possibility of anything else happening. It's just like the only possibility. What's really interesting to me is this infantry here. This infantry here means that my opponent has ferried this one as well and just unloaded this infantry on day 6. So basically we had on day 4 my opponent kind of ferried one infantry, and then my opponent went back, and then my opponent ferried another one last turn. Now what I'm really concerned about is, like, what if this is a tank? Because the ferry happened on day 6, and so if it's a day 5 tank from this city, this could actually also conceivably be on the lander and unloaded out of my vision. And if that's the case, that the tank could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and actually hit my recon, and there's very little that I can do about that. But it's only very little that I can do about it this turn. Additionally, worse for me is, so my opponent has the infantry on this mountain, which means that my opponent sees my recon. So the element of surprise is gone. Now, we're committed anyway, and this is just infantry, and we do have a recon here, so it's not the end of the world. One of the things that I was thinking about in bringing the recon here early is I was thinking about trapping an attempt on this city if I saw one, because this recon can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's timed with the capture of this city here. So I can basically hit the city with both the infantry and the recon. So it's like a nice little timing that could work out depending on when my opponent went for this capture. But they went for it very, very early, so they've avoided my timing. And additionally, this infantry surely is going to the center property this turn. I do not want my opponent to be able to get to that city. But I have a lot of money because I was saving all of my money for this turn, because I was going to get an artillery and a T-copter. But money means options, and no plan is a plan unless you actually do it. So plans can be changed. Volatile map means adjusting plans on the fly. We are not going to be building a T-copter anymore. Because we have the power to set a trap. It's the old day 6 copter build from the center base. I don't think this has ever been attempted before in the history of this map. People can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is a 100% Elagatua original. Never been tried before, but it just happens to work really well in this situation, because now if this infantry goes here, first of all, my opponent is never ever going to expect a copter to be available this early. Normally this airport gets captured like day 8 or day 9. Additionally, my opponent should never expecting an infantry to be here, which is free now from the airport. So, and additionally, on top of that, copter plus infantry has a pure coin flip roll, 50-50, to remove an infantry in one hit, or not in one hit, in one engagement from the city. So if my opponent does indeed come to capture this, I'm going to have a coin flip to be able to go in here and hit it with the copter, hit it with the infantry, and just get a free dude. Because there's no way that my opponent is going to be anticipating what I've actually built up until this point. So I had a plan. The plan was altered very seriously. Some other implications of this plan. I was going to go back this turn and pick up the artillery, but now I don't have money to make the artillery this turn. So now I'm my strength on the weak side is further degraded because I'm not going to have an artillery here in time to prevent any sort of early capture attempts on my comm tower. I can't really do anything about that, but that does mean that my lander here has an extra turn. I was going to come here this turn, but now I'm just going to come here to potentially boost this infantry over to here so that he can reach this property more quickly. And then next turn, we'll just kind of delay everything by a turn. We'll move him back, move the lander back here next turn to move the artillery here. But what this means is that it creates a timing where this comm tower is very vulnerable. And if an infantry shows up here on the comm tower, I don't really have a good way to deal with it because I don't really want to be denying an infantry on a comm tower with a mech. It's not very cost efficient for me, but we also we're just vulnerable. We can't play safe against every single possibility. We just have to accept that. And so we're gonna we'll deal with that when the time comes. But I'm just very cognizant that I may need to kind of sacrifice this mech in order to delay strong side aggression long enough so that I don't lose the tower. Forget about me getting the tower. I'm just trying not to lose the tower. That's what I'm thinking at this point. Okay, so that's the end of the turn. So let's see what happens. So that was an artillery showing up in the forest. So that's very good to see. It's not good news, but it's good to know. Because if I didn't see that artillery, you can bet I was going to be moving this mech onto the comm tower next turn. Now, I will not be doing that. So our comm tower is going to get locked, and we can't really do anything about that. But it's kind of okay. I mean, it's not great, but the whole reason I picked Von Bolt is because I wanted to be able to still be able to fight in the event that this happened, given that I'm focusing on the center. And so it's okay. We'll live with it. It's not the end of the world. It does mean, though, that any infantry attempts of my opponent to steal this tower are even stronger now, and that's even more concerning, because now, if an infantry comes down onto the comm tower, now my mech has to come in and deny the infantry, and then that also puts the mech in artillery range, which would be really, really inefficient for me. So I'm kind of holding my breath that I can get an artillery out to here before my opponent attempts to steal this comm tower away from me. More on that later. So you see this infantry go over, surely going to be going over to the city as we expected. I guess I didn't talk about what if there was a tank here. So the backup plan here is if there's a tank here and somehow goes all the way in on this recon, I actually have enough infantry here that I can block the tank in so that it's like stuck in this back area, and then the copter would be able to clean it up eventually. So I actually wasn't super afraid of the tank, or at least the possibility of a tank. And I kind of felt like it'd be kind of a crazy thing for my opponent to do, to commit like that many units from the weak side to the center, but regardless, I did have a plan if there was a tank there. That was another reason for building the copter. Like, I need the copter to prevent like a tank hitting my recon. And we see the infantry get loaded up into the lander, and he just freaking leaves. So I mean, that feels incredibly good for me. Feels incredibly good because that means he saw this recon and he was like, nope, I'm out. And he went through the trouble of ferrying the infantry here when it could have been going somewhere else, capturing stuff. And now it's leaving. Now it's probably leaving to get unloaded here onto the mountain to be able to capture the comm tower. So that is unfortunate. I can't really do anything about that, and that does mean that my opponent is going to get the comm tower for free, and there's not really anything I can do about it. Because I'm not going to be able to have any harassment units in place here. But I am hoping that, you know, there's like a tank coming from here that is just going to be sitting there twiddling his thumbs while all the rest of my stuff is in the middle dominating. That was kind of an interesting graphical bug there. So forget you saw that. Infantry is here in my mind. Okay, so now we move the recon over to verify that this infantry is in fact capturing the center, which it is. We do not need to fear anything as this copter. There's like no possibility that my opponent has this airport and has also built something from it. In fact, we are likely going to have 2 or 3 turns of a window where our opponent can't do anything against our copter because this is so early. And the capture order was so centered around this happening. And our opponent has basically just walked into a really, really strong counter to what they planned. But we do get a coin flip to see if he dies. Eventually. So move this guy in here because now we're setting up for next turn where this infantry is here to go here. This infantry is going to potentially go here. This infantry here. And this infantry is going to be here. So next turn, we are capping all 4 center cities. This is the cohesion of the build, right? This is kind of what I was trying to set up from the beginning. Now, the copter obviously wasn't the plan. It's supposed to be a T-copter to even get like an additional infantry, because this infantry was not originally planned to be able to get up here. And so this infantry was going to take his place. But things happened the way they happened. So regardless, I'm still in position to kind of hit the initial timing where I'm just like in the middle, really strong. I'm capping everything at once. And I'm hoping that my opponent doesn't really have a good counterplay to that. But let's see if we get the rolls here. Because you know how it is with me and coin flips. Oh wait, I said I'd never complain again after the game on the static. So we're not going to complain. Whatever happens is justice. Yeah, I freaking deserved that. I'm so good. Man, so nice. That's super nice. Because now there's no like counterattack potential on this infantry. Because now nothing can see him in the woods. So we get the 50-50 roll. I think it was actually a smidge better than 50-50. It's probably something like 55%, but it was basically as close to a coin flip as you can get that we got that roll. So that sets us up perfectly for next turn. So I'm feeling amazing about that. I know my opponent had inefficiencies in their weak side because that infantry left, and now I just removed the leading infantry. This is the day 1 infantry just got killed. Free dude. Like there's no counterplay at all. And the next turn, I'm very likely to be able to achieve my objective of just locking down the entire center, which is incredible. So we continue playing this turn out, and we are going to be going for double artillery now. In my mind, I'm thinking, this center is mine. It does not matter what my opponent has here. There's no way there's going to be an anti-air here in time to threaten this copter. It's probably going to be like another at least 2 turns at the earliest before an anti-air could potentially be in the center. And we're going to be able to see this airport with a recon next turn, because we can go into this forest here and see. So we'll know the exact timing of when the copters show up. So we can be pretty aggressive with this copter and send it wherever we want, and without a whole lot of risk. So now that we have center control, we need to think about what comes next. And what comes next is dealing with the strong side, weak side mechanics. We need to defend this comm tower, and we want to put pressure on this comm tower. Now, we don't have anywhere near enough strength to put any kind of pressure on anything at the moment, but we will eventually have the opportunity to shift this copter to one side or the other. That is the nice thing about the flexibility of air units, is that, sure, I've committed this guy to the center for now, but it's very easy for me to send him somewhere else depending on where I feel is good. So this artillery is going to be locking down this comm tower. This artillery is going to be setting up for a push this way later on. So we want to basically start building the snowball over here so that we got the middle. We want to start pushing on the strong side once we've built up enough stuff, and then ideally we're probably going to be playing a comm tower down, so my opponent's going to get this comm tower. I'm going to be denying this one, just keeping it neutral. And really the comm tower we want to take is this one. And then that would be the win condition. If we're able to take this comm tower and deny this one, then with our income lead in the center, that's basically a game-winning advantage. So now we see an infantry come here. We see a lander show up in movement there, which I see from this mountain. It's actually a little bit of a misplay, I guess. Maybe my opponent doesn't have vision over here, but you should probably be following the coast there, but it's not really super important. Anyway, so this infantry, I see this. This is actually good news for me, because the last turn was the turn that I was afraid of an infantry being able to capture this tower. Now I've got vision, so like there's no way I could be caught off guard by it. Like I would know if an infantry is in position to go for it. But now that this infantry is here, now my artillery is going to be here in time. So I'm no longer afraid of losing this this comm tower. I can just have this mech chill here and protect the artillery, and I'm not going to be in any danger. We're going to be going very aggressively over here. This is not really safe, but I also am aware of the mechanics of this map, where my opponent's been sending a lot of weak side power to the center from what I've been seeing. So I'm just going to try and be greedy, and if this infantry gets denied because there's early stuff over here, then we just live with it. We give up a free dude, and that's how it goes. But if I can just split this side and give up all of this stuff and then win the middle, then I'm 4K ahead. So this is like the last property that I need to get to really ensure that I've got an income advantage. And I'm just going to aggressively go for it and make my opponent have stuff in position to stop it, and assume the risk of kind of overextending on the weak side. So go in here, and oh, this is a beautiful site. This is not being captured, and the airport's not being captured. That's lovely. Love to see that. And that even opens up harassment opportunities where I could consider, if an infantry shows up here, I could even potentially be going in aggressively with the copter and the recon to be denying this airport, because overextension in this map, it's the normal rules don't apply, as we mentioned in the map in the map breakdown. But we'll see what happens next turn. It's too early for them like that. Seeing this property open makes me think, what if instead of capturing this guy just went straight for the jugular? Now, I think realistically, it's very unlikely that I would be able to capture this. But it's a Von Bolt infantry on a city. And what that means is that 2 Von Bolt infantry can't remove an infantry on a city either. And so I don't really need to actually get all the cities this turn because I've got this infantry that's trailing. So I can capture 3 of these, and then this infantry will just get the last one. Like this. Whoop. And why hello there, friend. Well, not what I expected, but this guy is begging to be hit with a copter. So we'll finish capping these. So we're going for the 3 most aggressive ones. Because if we get these 3, there's no way that this guy who's going to come get this city next turn is going to get stopped as long as I get all 3 of these. I might as well try to hit this guy with the copter. Might as well, right? It seems really likely that there's probably an infantry in here. I'm not expecting this to actually work, but there's really no downside to trying. The odds of there being an anti-air here, I believe it's literally impossible. Maybe not literally impossible, but anyway, the fact that we saw the artillery here means it's like there's just not enough money for there to be an anti-air here. So this copter might as well try because it's not going to be at any risk, and there's nothing else that he can do that's very productive this turn. So I'm just going to give it a shot and see if it works. No, not quite yet. I guess we'll do everything else first. Boop. And here we have blinky-eyed, blank stare. How'd this get there? Says Greg Davies. What is a recon doing in this forest? It's so weird. So weird. The thing that's most weird about it is actually the fuel. The fuel is at 60. This absolutely baffled me. I could not figure this out. How in the world is this here with 60 fuel? Now I know there's been some discussion in the community. I don't like the fact that you can see the fuel in fogs. It provides too much information. And to be honest, I don't really care. If they want to change it so it make it so you can't see fuel, that's not my problem. But the reality is that if the information is there for me to see, I'm going to use it to my advantage as best I can until they change things. So that's my take on that. And the reason why this is so bizarre is think about how would a recon get here? Well, the most obvious way for a recon to get here is it would basically be following the same path that my recon took, where the lander was like here, and then he went to here, and the recon got unloaded here, and then went into the forest like that, right? That's pretty straightforward. But if that was the case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so actually, so the recon would have to go on the port, right? So the lander's here on the port. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 gets on the boat, gets carried over here, unloaded here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that is 14 fuel. But that's not 14 fuel is not 20 fuel. 20 fuel being gone means this recon has moved for at least 3 turns. It's actually a very important thing to understand because recons can move 8 squares, and each square is one fuel. Obviously, the recon has the penalty, so it's spending 2 fuel for every planes. But if it starts at 80 and it's at 60, it means it spent 20 fuel. And the only way to spend 20 fuel is to move 8, 8, and 4, or 7, 7, and 6, or something else, something that adds up to 20, right? But you can't get to 20 fuel in 2 moves. So that means there's 3 moves that were involved in getting this recon here. And that means that the recon had to be alive for 3 days in order to spend 3 days worth of fuel. Is day 8, which means that this recon was not dropped here on day 6. So it was dropped here on, or sorry, it wasn't dropped here on day 7. Because I'm moving seconds. It wasn't dropped here on day 7, and then day 8 it moved in here, which means it wasn't built on day 6. So it had to be built earlier than day 6. So it was a day 5 or before recon. So this actually tells me a lot of information, because in addition to the artillery being here, we now know that a recon was also built on day 5 or before. And the only reason, or the only way for the artillery to get here is if it was unloaded. I forget when it arrived. It was like days. It was like was it day 7 it arrived? Yeah, it was on day 7 that it arrived. It was on day 7 that it arrived, which means that it had to get unloaded on day 6, which means it was built on day 5. So we basically have almost full information about our opponent's income spending. The first 2 vehicles were a recon and artillery, and they were built, well, the artillery was definitely built on day 5, and the recon was built before day 5, could be potentially as early as day 3. And my current theory for how this happened was there's a day 3 recon from this base that on day 4 got unloaded here and then drove around a bit and then ultimately ended up back in the forest, and that's how it spent the 20 fuel. That's my current theory, because otherwise there's no way for it to get here. Like, it would have to be taken here on day 4, and then the lander has to go back, and then on day 6 the lander comes back and drops the artillery off, and then the artillery drives into the forest on day 7. That's the only way that I can conceive of things being where they are. And if that is in fact the case, that's really good news for me, because that means that there was a day 3 recon that did absolutely jack squat this entire game, in addition to the infantry that was inefficient on the other side. So I kind of left my analysis there because it just seemed, no matter what, this is really good. And even though the recon is there and it can kind of interrupt the captures, it can even get over to here potentially. I have a copter and a recon of my own, and as long as this copter ends up on low defense terrain, the copters, or the copter and the recon can actually kill the recon, even without a comm tower for me. So this recon is totally isolated and can't really do anything. And the most logical thing would be for the recon to help kill this infantry on the city, but doing so is going to put it on low defense terrain. And based on what I know about my opponent's income usage, I know there can't be an anti-air. The implication of the recon and the artillery on day 5 is that day 6 there's not enough money to build an anti-air, which means that the earliest anti-air that could be made is on day 7. And so that means that it would be the earliest anti-air that could be showing up here would be an anti-air being unloaded this turn. This coming turn. So my copter is in absolutely no risk, basically. That's the bottom line. Okay, next turn, let's see what happens. Well, hello there. Okay, not unexpected. That's right, he couldn't actually see this square, so he had to make sure I wasn't blocking that. Goes in and hits the infantry. We see another infantry come in here and hit my infantry. Okay, well, we love to see this. This is tremendous. This infantry, you did a great job. You didn't capture the city, but you also damaged 2 infantry, which now cannot capture a city in 2 turns. So that's awesome. So he did his job. He's going to run away. This guy got damaged, but now he's contributed chip damage to the recon, which means it's still actually technically a roll for me to to be able to kill the recon without additional attacks from the infantry, but it's pretty favorable. I think it's like, I forget the math, it was like 70% or something like that. And even if I don't get it, I have the ability just to finish it off with a full health infantry. So this recon is going to be dying no matter what. Unfortunately, we have to kind of attack with this recon first so that we can free up the forest for the copter to attack from, so that we can continue capturing this city. So finish our captures. We're always going for these aggressive lines of captures here. We always shoot the recon. This is amazing. So my opponent was going to see if there's anything waiting for the infantry that was going to try and steal my comm tower. Well, in fact, there was something waiting. I could have actually elected to finish off this recon by sacrificing my mech, but I chose not to. I felt like it was very important for me to preserve units on my weak side, because the weak side is so weak, and you can see how little units I have over here. I was very relieved that this recon didn't try to harass this infantry, though, because this infantry was absolutely vulnerable, and I would not have had a good answer to any sort of harass coming from these two tiles over there. All right, so finishing captures. We go in here. We do this also because this lets us take a look at what is over here. And we see some interesting information. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we want to know about this line to see if there's any anti-air. It'd be pretty unlikely for there to be an anti-air here built from the weak side, because again, anything you commit this way from the weak side base is making you really vulnerable over here. So pretty unlikely. But before I send the copter in, I do need to know, because now any hidden anti-air would be here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which means they can't reach the copter for sure. So copter going to be totally safe no matter what, hitting this recon now that we have this information. We have to take some chip damage on the recon, but that's okay. He can heal. And we do get the roll here again that we were favored to get. So that recon is gone, which means we do not need to do anything special with the infantry. We can just finish capturing the city here. We retreat this guy, and we celebrate a plan actually going to plan for a change in a tournament game. I feel like I've been getting clobbered in the openers, especially in the Spacky Cup 4. I've been just absolutely massacred, but this game has been very, very different. Interestingly enough, though, this comm tower's not captured yet. And that's kind of strange, because I thought this guy had delivered the infantry over here. And if he had delivered the infantry over there, then this comm tower capture would have finished already, but it hasn't. I don't really have a good understanding of why, but I was never planning on contesting it to begin with, so I guess it's a moot point. I thought about maybe moving the artillery here to potentially pick off the infantry after it's done capturing it, but I decided against it because I really am weak over here. I'm capturing stuff, but I have really nothing supporting these units, and I kind of want to wait a little bit for my strength to build up before launching what I'm hoping will be a pretty devastating attack onto the weak side. Okay, that's pretty much that. Beyond the cleanup, I guess I didn't talk about this too much. I built an extra copter here, primarily because I want to be able to fight against copters from the weak side using my copters from the center. And instead of trying to play defense with a lot of stuff here, I'm actually just going to all in very heavily on this side and try to rely on mechs to hold this line as long as I possibly can. Because if I own the center and I control this area, that's basically game with the kind of income lead that I have. Especially denying this city for very long. Like, this is gonna be, when everything shakes out, it's gonna be a 5K income lead for me. by like day 10, which is assuming that this city doesn't get harassed, which could definitely happen, and I am totally unprepared for. So, very little happened, which is exactly what I wanted. So, everything has been perfect so far. This turn is just all going to be about consolidating. And now, phase 1 of the plan, pretty much complete. Everything that we wanted to do, we did. And we killed a recon. We got an artillery hit on another recon. And we got a free dude at the cost of some damaged infantry. So, spectacular start for me, and now the income is going to be rolling in. Look at all those delicious finished captures. And now we don't need to try and go crazy and go into here. We have this infantry infestation. We control these mountains, which means we're going to have a great vision of the sides just from our center control. And now we can even deny this city just by having a lot of infantry in the center. Now we're shifting our focus to the strong side. This is the follow-up play. When you're pushing on the strong side, it's absolutely imperative that you get artillery. And this is kind of a strange map. You can see now, day 10, this is like the first day that I've got a tank on the field. So tanks are actually not very good on this map relative to how good they are and how standard they are on any other map. Because on the weak side, one of the main ways that you can defend is by copter spamming from here. So you absolutely must have one anti-air on the strong side if you're going to push, and ideally 2. And we're going to be following up with another anti-air this turn to follow this first one up. And we're now shifting our copters over. So they were in the middle, but now there's nothing left to kill in the middle. So now they are going to be going over to the strong side to help with this push. And I'm hoping that I can just start trading with all this stuff. 2 copters and an anti-air. I should be pretty well equipped to deal with any sort of copters from this airport. So copter, anti-air, focusing very heavily on the strong side. I honestly think this was a little bit of a mistake. I think what I should have done is instead, I decided to be very passive here and I just refuel the lander. He's got 60 fuel, that's still a lot. What I should have done this turn is I should have sent him to the other side of the map. Because blocking this choke just kind of randomly halfway through the game would be really strong. And I know that my opponent doesn't have, like, normally you wouldn't be able to do that because your opponent's gonna have copters and just is gonna kill your lander. But my opponent, I know my opponent doesn't have any copters from here because we just saw it get captured like a turn ago. So, anyway, it would have been smarter to do that, but I didn't. So the lander kind of interestingly goes here. Basically, this is like kind of a very defensive position lander, trying to block any attacks onto the infantry, which is on the mountains. And this infantry also does see my copter, so I am kind of revealing my hand a little bit that I'm going to be focusing on the strong side. Although it's not really a huge mystery, because that is just kind of what you do on this map. So even without knowing anything about my opponent's comp over here, I can be pretty confident that my opponent is doing the same thing, and I am preparing the defensive line and being very far back, assuming that I'm going to get attacked. And the artillery leaves, which is kind of nice. So now I'm like, well, I mean, he's left, so I might as well send the mech in to try and get my comm tower. Although I feel like if I get the comm tower, kind of just winning the game. And the power of the center control is so strong. Like, I can just repair these infantry. They did a great job. And I'm also denying this city just by sitting here. Sure, I can't really push into here, but I don't need to. The status quo is great. Status quo is me up 5k. And we do some kind of vision shenanigans here. And we see, okay, there's a copter, so that's good to know that my opponent is investing in copters from there. And yeah, I mean, the center vision tells you so much. So now we're going to go in here, and we're going to be just very aggressive. We see this copter, and so I'm thinking there's probably not more than one copter on this side, based on what we've seen so far. My opponent would have to be really spamming copters almost every turn in order to have enough copters built up, given that these were like very, very early copters. So I can actually trap this lander in here and remove it. And while the lander is not really a lucrative target on the weak side, in a Von Bolt mirror, it does have some pretty decent value to remove it, because the lander is your primary means of magneting the Ex Machina. And generally, if all things are equal, you want to magnet it with your weak side lander, because your weak side lander is like the least important unit that you have on the map, and it's also pretty valuable, so it can target a lot of value. And so often, like, you want to use like maybe copters and the lander together to try and magnet it. So if I remove this lander, then that means that when Ex Machina comes online, it's going to be the strong side lander that's going to have to magnet it instead, and that's going to be much more effective. Now the risk here is that I'm exposing a copter here. Now I just choose to kind of go for it, because my read is that my opponent only has, at best one copter. And if there's one copter, by the way, then my anti-air is in position to cover me. Or at least it'll cover a second copter. So I'm willing to eat one copter attack on this guy, and then this copter can kind of counterattack. But if there's more than one copter, then I've got an anti-air which can also counter as well. So it's hard for this to be too terrible for me, no matter how many copters my opponent has. And we're just going to go in pretty aggressively. Obviously, we know we're not going to be capturing this comm tower this turn, but the point is we're forcing the fight, and we want to start trading on the weak side so that we can whittle down the infantry numbers. Because if we're reinforcing from two bases and there's only infantry from one base over here, as long as we trade reasonably evenly, we're going to end up with more infantry when all is said and done. Now, obviously, the terrain that we're attacking into is very difficult terrain, but that's why we do have the artillery here. So we just want to kind of start trading in this area and see if we can start wearing the numbers down. And this is the first turn that we've managed to get all of our income from our hard-earned cities in the center. So now that we have 26k from our 5k lead, we're going to use that immediately for a Neo-Tank that's going to get slingshotted to the front next turn to further add a lot of power to our push here. And there should be no way that my opponent can do anything about a Neo-Tank beyond bombers, which would be very difficult for them to afford. So the lander gets destroyed. He kills his own lander to free up space there. And we get nailed by two copters, so not great. Infantry comes in to hit the mech. Another artillery shows up. It's artillery number 2. And even here, this is probably sloppy by me. I probably should have had this infantry further back. I didn't respect the power on the strong side enough. And we saw last turn, so this city wasn't even captured. So actually we had a 6k lead. It wasn't even a 5k lead, it was a 6k lead. But now the side trading has begun. And this is a really strong push. Okay, so seems not great. Our copters kind of got splashed there, and we don't really have a great counter attack to that. So this engagement is going to go negatively, although we will get to counter with the anti-air. The good news is that we can... this mech is covering these copters, but actually this tile is not safe. Because we can get infantry onto this tile and pop the mech. So that helps keep this anti-air safe, which is very important because we know that there's many copters here, and having this tile gives us vision of the base, which is really, really nice. And so we see an infantry here, and that means, so we see infantry here, which means, and we see that nothing's being built at the airport, which means there's like a copter here like 1,000,000% of the time, by the way. And probably vehicles over here as well. So we have a really good idea of what our opponent is doing. It's kind of unfortunate because we invested in a Neo tank, and now all of a sudden we find ourselves fighting copter spam and not really being especially well equipped to deal with it. And our tank comes in, hits the anti-air, and our opponent was very, very ready for that, as you can see with the artillery and the 2 mechs. But I feel like as long as I can kind of build up any number of copters on the weak side, I can stabilize enough to just let my income advantage allow me to produce enough air units that eventually this push will have to bleed out. And so we're just going to try and damage the infantry as much as we can, because that's going to slow down the push. Like, the objective here is we just want to slow it down. We're going to lose over here for sure. But if we can lose over here slow enough and keep the comm tower uncaptured long enough, then eventually our power over here is going to win out. And we can even lose all of this as long as we end up getting the comm tower here. Because if we control this and we control this, even if we lose almost everything over here, we're still winning. But this is, I mean, you can see the writing on the wall here. This next turn is going to hurt. All this stuff's going to die for sure. But we do have the Neo tank reveal next turn, and the infantry fight is going pretty decently over here. This artillery is in a great position. So we're going to start building some copters from this weak side. Maybe should have shifted some of these copters. Like, this guy is kind of in no man's land. Probably would have been better to be here last turn. Would have helped me out a lot. And now even, like, it's a little bit of indecision, right? Like, we see him, like, go, I was going to go this side. Oh, actually, now we need to go to the other side. Actually, the reason for that, I just kind of skipped past this. So now that the attack has started, I know I'm really strong in the middle still. And I might as well put some pressure on here with all this infantry that I've built up. Because my opponent can't reinforce here, here, and here with limited funds at the same time. So even if I can trade like slightly badly over here, it's going to be good for, like, I'm going to win somewhere, right? I'm up 6K. I'm going to win somewhere if I just kind of push everywhere at once. It seems like generally not the way that you should think about things, but on this map, that is kind of, this map is exceptional in some ways like that. And I see this tank. We see we have nothing that we can do to fight a tank except use the copter. So this infantry is going to probably be sacrificed, but it's okay. We're just trying to draw out a fight here. Tank comes in as we expected. Now, importantly, so this infantry sees this copter here now, but the tank went in before the vision was seen from the copter. So normally if you send a tank into copter range, it's kind of implying that you have anti-air backing it up. But in this case, that's not for sure because of the ordering. So we're not going to read too much into that. Infantry comes in here, and the weak side massacre begins. And there's the second anti-air. So we talked about this in the map breakdown. This airport is exactly 3 tank moves, or anti-air moves in this case, away from this base. And my opponent wisely has a second anti-air to back this up. And this actually, I think this was baited really, really well by my opponent. I think I misplayed this really badly. I should have been building copters here earlier, and then I probably should not have even taken this engagement. I probably should have just allowed things to try and stagnate along this line and given up this city instead of coming out to fight it, because this ends up being just really, really inefficient for me. And as you can see, my opponent has enough beat up units left over that he's actually able to wall this off. And frustratingly, his infantry goes down to 7, which means I can't... So I built this tank anticipating that this might happen. But I thought that there wasn't a way for him to wall me off here, and that, okay, like, sure, he can clear the anti-air, but then it's, or he can clear the copter, but then it's a trade and this tank comes in, hits this anti-air, and then now I've got more free reign for these copters to come in and clean up. But actually, now I can't get through this. So it's just really bad. Technically, this is maybe a roll to remove this recon, and I'm going to take it just for the sake of it, but I didn't even bother calculating it out. Whether there's actually a chance for it to kill or not, because I just don't think there's anything useful that that the infantry could do otherwise. So it's just always going to attack you, even if there's no chance. So now let's look at the strong side. So let's see what's happening over here. We got a lot of infantry coming in to remove a 3 HP copter, which I love to see, because now all this infantry is on low defense terrain, which means it can be cleaned up. So this side seems really spooky, and it is really spooky. It's very, very bad. But because I'm winning, because I won the middle so far, so hard, and because this side is actually kind of going okay, and I'm going to reveal the Neotank this turn, it is still kind of okay. But I am starting to feel like I'm throwing over here a little bit. And so I kind of agonized over this turn, because this is the Neotank reveal turn, but now look at the charge. So you can see I'm starting to take more damage than my opponent. And it's a little bit misleading, because I also did damage to half of a lander as well. And so that's not really like combat value. So just basing it on like the damage done is a little bit misleading. Like I've kind of taken a pounding in these fights, but I'm rich, right? And we did at least deny this city. This city was not captured, so we maintained our 5k lead. We're assuming that this capture finished. So my main objective this turn, these copters are fighting into these mountains. Actually, my anti-air are not super helpful, unfortunately, in dealing with these copters. But the anti-air are really good at dealing with infantry, especially infantry that are not on cities. So anti-air are still going to be able to clear out stuff. And what I really want to do is I want to remove this mech on the mountain, which is no small feat. But if I remove this mech, then basically I can come up with a really strong wall to be able to potentially deal with this comm tower. And fighting all this stuff is actually not going to generate a lot of charge. So I need to be careful. Like, I really don't want my opponent to be able to get superpower next turn if I can avoid it. So obviously we're going to be removing that guy. We do the roll here just to see if we got it in the unlikely event that we did, but that was very unlikely to ever happen, potentially, and by very unlikely, like potentially impossible. So we're just going to take what we can. We do at least get some unit kills, so we are kind of slowing down the push a little bit, but we are very, very on life support down here. And we can't really go in with the copter here, knowing that there's a full HP anti-air waiting for it. That's too much of a throw. So instead, we're going to start clearing out stuff over here and setting this up. So we want to see if there's anything in the forest. Honestly, I think I probably should have sent this guy into the forest instead of stopping him short, but that's neither here nor there. He is at least blocking for this anti-air, which is important. So Neotank goes in here, and then with the Neotank plus the infantry, I think it was a very favorable roll. I forget exactly what the roll was, but it was very likely that that would kill. So now we have this position back again, which again is very nice because we see so much of what's going on here. So we see copter spam and mechs. And we know that our opponent has like 21k per turn. A mech plus copter is 12k. So we know that the majority of the money of our opponent is being spent over here. So that's good to know. So that means like this side is not getting reinforced very much. And it probably means that there's no copters in the middle as well. And so we're actually going to be attacking into this, which feels like an overextension, but it's not really an overextension. And we're just going to send this copter in on the tank. And it feels risky, but it's not actually that risky. If you look at this airport, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not within one turn reinforced at the airport. And I'm pretty sure 2 turns ago, I actually had vision at the airport to know that there was nothing being built. So this copter is not going to be hit by another copter. So the only thing that could possibly hit this copter is an anti-air hiding back here. But it's really hard to imagine an anti-air being hidden back here from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It'd be a 3-turn reinforce driving that way with an anti-air. And on this side, we can kind of see the unload zone. So we're pretty confident that there's no anti-air over here. So pretty confident that this copter is going to be safe hitting this tank. Pretty low risk. Does mean that this copter is not going to be fighting over here, which further weakens us on that side. But I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. And I had actually considered not taking this engagement here to try and keep the charge down, because now my opponent has the option to sack stuff into anti-airs to get confirmed superpower. And because of that, I mean, I think my opponent probably won't do that, because my opponent will probably be assuming that I have some sort of counterplay. But my play here is strong enough on the strong side that my opponent could potentially feel desperate enough to go for it as kind of a last-ditch effort. So this really, really hurts me to do, but I actually have to build another Neotank, because like this stuff is like the value here is all clumped up very strongly. So my opponent like could very easily go tank infantry into this guy and then get access to this anti-air to sack copters into, to for sure get up to superpower. So like, and if that's the case and all of this stuff gets hit, which is what would happen if I'm not magneting down here, then all my anti-airs and the Neo-Tank get Ex Machina'd, which could be really, really bad. So I'm not willing to take that risk. So I planned this all in advance, by the way. I wasn't going to take as an aggressive line on this turn if I didn't have a way to magnet. But I have to sacrifice and do this kind of magnet. And it stinks because I'd really like to build a Neo-Tank over here. Like, if I'm going to build a Neo-Tank, I would much rather it be on the weak side instead. Like, this Neo-Tank doesn't do jack for me on the strong side. But I just... not doing this is game throwing if my opponent decides to risk it. And so I'm hoping... I think there's one more copter back here somewhere that we know about, and then there's these two. So I don't think that this wall will necessarily hold. I think this copter and then a copter back here can hit this 8 HP infantry, and then this mech can come on and delay this another turn. So that's not ideal, but at the same time, we are thinning out the infantry numbers very heavily on the strong side. And as long as my anti-airs stay alive, we are winning on this push. We're not winning as fast or as hard as my opponent is winning on the other side, but it's working. It's pretty scary, but it is working. So my anti-air takes a shot here. It's not ideal, but, and also, like, where the heck did this tank come from? I guess I knew the tank was there, but like, he had this tank saved up from earlier, which is pretty crazy. Yeah, so all that happens. Oh, so we went for this one. I'm assuming that wasn't a roll. I'm assuming that wasn't a roll, but I don't know for sure, and I'm not going to do the math. But anyway, does delay this comm tower capture another turn. Things are falling apart horrifically on my weak side. And there's another copter. Oh my goodness, there's so many copters. Where are all these copters coming from? But we have been losing. We've been throwing hard enough that we're going to get the first Ex Machina. So that's something, you know? Tank runs away. Anti-air was not here as we expected. And this is fine. So we said that we have to be winning somewhere, right? We're winning in the center. We are winning on this side. And this turn is going to be pretty good for us. This turn is a little bit technical on everywhere but the weak side. The weak side, well, you don't really have any options, so you just do what you can. The only thing that I'm really scared of is if somehow there's a bomber here. Because I can't really... I have no anti-air coming. Because I had to build this stupid Neo-Tank to play it safe last turn. I much would have preferred to have an anti-air here and then like a medium tank over here. Like, that would have been ideal, but I didn't want to throw the game on the possibility of my opponent sacking into my anti-airs. So here we are. I got to keep my anti-airs alive. They are my lifeline to dealing with this copter spam. And if there's a bomber here, which is unlikely because I don't know how my opponent could have afforded a bomber, but if there is one here, then I need to make sure the Ex Machina hits this. Because we know that in the world where there's a bomber here, there's a copter here and a copter here, right? So if there's a bomber here, then this is getting Ex Machina, like 100%. So I just need to protect that possibility. And so we do all the stuff that we're automatically going to do. We're also going to be pushing up with these infantry because we know that all this stuff ran away. So it's actually kind of fun. We can potentially threaten caps of these tiles here because we're so much stronger in the center. So we use the Neo tank here to kill the tank. We know that nothing can touch the Neo tank except for potentially a bomber. And then this gets us very, very close to Ex Machina, and now we're there. So we do the Ex Machina. And it does not go off over here, which means that basically there's no chance that there's a bomber there. We weren't expecting it anyway, but we had to play that way. It goes off here. And actually, if you look at the log, you can get the exact coordinates. So it went off exactly in this area, which means that this base is getting locked. So that's kind of nice. Surely the lander is in here somewhere. And it also, based on the fact that this city got included, it means that there was something on this city that got locked as well. So now we're gonna just kind of play this out. This is kind of an automatic turn. There's really only one thing that we can do. We're gonna actually skip this capture because I want to see what got locked on this city. Because I knew that something was there, almost certainly. And ooh la la, Juicy blocked anti-air, and we see that this airport is not taken as well. And actually, I should have done this in the opposite order. I should have done this guy first, but because then I could have moved this guy into the woods. But whatever, small mistakes. So we see this tank now. Well, he's not going to be able to run away. Get that roll. This tank is dead. It's not overextending because the rules don't apply on this map. Very confident that this copter is safe. And because we're winning in the center, and we have so much vision in the center, we can actually set up for a potential victory. Just straight up victory with this infantry, because now this infantry is potentially going to be able to threaten the HQ. Now, the likelihood of it working, pretty low. But the nice thing about having so much vision is that we don't actually have to go for it if it's not going to work. And the victory condition is if there's no copter and there's no vehicle here, then we just win. And actually, it depends on what these guys do next turn as well. But basically, we have no way to remove anything from the airport, but it's possible that our opponent could be intimidated from building anything from the airport, seeing that there's a copter that is just chilling right next to it. So that's, and if there's no vehicle built from here, and obviously this side is under a lot of pressure as well, so it's very realistic that this wouldn't be a vehicle as well, given that my opponent is spamming out mechs. So if neither of those things occur, then I can basically move this guy up, and then I can wall with this guy and this copter into the choke here, and then there should not be anything that would be able to reach this tile the following turn. Now, it's a little bit speculative because it kind of depends on how some of this stuff plays out, but given how bad this looks, having a potential win condition on the board is pretty nice. Additionally, now we're free to kind of go ham on the strong side as well, knowing that there's not going to be a bomber. All this stuff is just kind of auto. I mean, we do get 2 unit kills, so that's nice, but the artillery are here and are going to obliterate all this stuff, and there's just not much we can do about that. But at least we are we are at least picking off units, and we know that a lot of the money is being spent over here as well. And we continue capping this. And we set up there. So this is our new magnet. This is actually a much better magnet than we would have had last turn, because last turn we would have had our base blocked. But this is, we're magneting the Neo, which we don't really, we're not going to get much value out of the Neo anyway. And then we're going to magnet the anti-air, which is on a city. It's not great to have an anti-air get magneted, but it is at least going to be repaired. So by the time it gets unmagneted, it will be up to 5 HP and useful against the bazillions of copters that we're fighting against here. And we're able to continue walling, and this copter as well is going to be out of vision. So I put it just outside of vision of a copter that is going to be attacking any of these infantry so that it's going to stay safe. But it will be available to me the following turn. And honestly, what's going to win us the game, more likely than anything else, is this lander. Because this lander, so we know that the lander for our opponent is like locked in here. And by the time it finally becomes unlocked, my lander is going to be blocking the choke. The old surprise day 15 lander in the choke move. And we know that there's probably a big tech unit here, right? So it's tech unit, anti-air, and lander that just tanked the Ex Machina. And then whatever this big tech unit is going to get stuck here when my lander blocks the choke. So that is probably something I should have done earlier than now, but better late than never, and timely. And finally, we built an anti-air on the strong side, which is long overdue. And the nice thing for us now is, even though there's like a lot of copters here, there's nothing to deal with the anti-air. And also, the copters, like, they can't run, but they can't fight either. Something's got to go and fight into this infantry that's capping the comm tower. And the thing that's going to have to do the fighting is going to be a copter. And whatever copter fights into that infantry, it's just going to get killed. So the copters are going to start to bleed out. And again, it's okay if all this stuff dies, as long as we win here. And obviously there's the bonus of this area being under a ton of pressure as well. So Ex Machina goes off, hits our magnet here. Another anti-air shows up and fights into the tank, but we are Von Bolt superpowered. So this tank has a ridiculous amount of defense on this airport. And this just ends the game. I was really surprised to see the resign here. I was expecting this to go on for another turn or two at least. And so the first thing we should do, now that the game is over, is we can turn on the lights. And we can see what was actually going on here. And we can see that we did magnet, or my opponent did magnet what we expected here. So they were in a lot of trouble. And it's kind of hard to know what would have ended up playing out, because they lost a lot of money to repairs, and not like they had a ton of money. And they actually didn't even bother capturing this the whole time, which is really surprising. So like my opponent eventually should have been like only 3K down, but I was going to be getting this city for sure. And depending on how things turned out the next turn, there's the potential for instant death. And this side is unsalvageable. So like eventually I'm getting this tower. My opponent did well to delay it as long as they did, but the time has finally run out. They are sufficiently bled out that they can no longer delay this any further. So yeah, I guess they just didn't want to continue fighting, because they felt like it was, likely to end in defeat despite everything, which I think is probably true. But I probably would have kept going for at least another turn, but who knows. But I mean, I get it. Being so far down in income for so long can just feel insurmountable. And obviously, there's no way I'm ever going to be losing the center area with just the amount of infantry that I have over here. and this side is getting out of control. So I get it. I had even thought about building a fighter this turn, given that really the only thing keeping him afloat on this side is the copters, and the fighter would be pretty devastating. But even as it were, this side was unsalvageable, I think. But yeah, I mean, hey, forget all that. Like, we won. It's over. The Smacky Cup 4 is finally over after 9 months of grinding it out in this tournament and others at the same time, and we are the champions. We did it. So I'm really thrilled that we managed to pull it off, and it's been my goal for over a year to be able to win one of these, and we did it. We finally saw it through. I don't know for sure what my trophy is going to end up being. So if you're unfamiliar with this, if you win one of the main site tournaments, which is one of these, you get to, in your Division 1, which is the highest division, you get to choose a unit that you can put on your trophy. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be a Blue Moon Neo tank. I think I'm probably lying to myself to think of choosing anything else, but I want whatever I choose to kind of be the most prominent unit that featured in my matches, and it probably is going to have to be the Neo tank, especially given the previous round. I think we've got to reward the hungriest boy ever carrying me to victory solely on the back of that one unit. I think we got to probably reward him with the trophy, but I'll at least give myself some time to think about it before I finalize it. But I'm really thrilled that we got to win one of these, and we got a chance to win another one too. The Smacky Cup 3. We're in the grand finals of that one as well, and it's not like I'm just going to throw that one now that I've won a tournament. But I'm at least thinking about getting a little crazy, so we'll see what happens. Who knows? And certainly in Smacky Cup 5, I'm going to play way more loose with some of my strats in Smacky Cup 5 now that I've kind of accomplished my goal. I don't need to be as try-hard as I've been in Smacky Cup 3 and Smacky Cup 4. So I'm just saying that if I lose doing something silly in Smacky Cup 5, it's probably me just trying to have a little bit of fun after trying with full force in all these matches. So yeah, let's go through and let's look through the video with the replay with full vision now, because there's some stuff that well, it wasn't what I thought it was when I was going through it. So first of all, so this part made a lot of sense, but there's no day 3 recon like I thought there was. So I was totally wrong about that, but this part was correct. So that first infantry did end up getting shuttled up here. And it's not a day 3 recon, it's a day 5 recon, but it's from the weak side. So we thought that there might be like a tank over here. Not the case. In fact, there's a recon instead. It's kind of nice for us because this city is finishing the capture before this recon has a chance to interrupt it. And I think even my opponent may have considered sending these two guys to maybe harass this infantry until this recon showed up, and I kind of ruined the plans. And once this recon shows up, there really isn't that much more damage that can be accomplished by this recon now. Like, you mean the best you can do is, you don't have the comm tower, so even a recon and an infantry is actually unlikely to kill an infantry, a vulnerable infantry on a city. So you're kind of just, if you do that, you're kind of committing, you're putting the recon in danger for kind of little gain. So I can understand kind of giving up on that play, but that does explain how this recon ended up in this forest with 20 fuel missing, because he ended up driving all the way from this side. So that had confused me, and it never even occurred to me that this recon could actually be from the weak side instead of the strong side. It just seemed so unlikely that it never even entered my mind. So my opponent also played very passively on the strong side, just locking the comm tower, but not really supporting it with that much. But I was very fortunate here that this recon decided to drive directly into artillery range on the turn that the artillery arrived there. That was very fortunate for me. And I think despite the wobbly is a very kind way of describing what happened to me in the next couple of turns. Despite everything that happened, my opener was so much better in terms of execution. I think the concept was better, but also basically what I did was kind of a hard counter to what my opponent did, because my opponent kind of rushed center and I also rushed center, but better. And so the RPS implications were really, really punishing for my opponent. And I'm so far ahead at this point that the wheels would really have to fall off for me to lose at this point. And I mean, fair play. Like I tried to throw pretty hard on the weak side. I should have, I just don't know why I even bothered to try and go for this. I saw my opponent retreat and I was like, okay, might as well take a stab at it, right? Like we got the artillery backing it up. So like the cap of the comm tower is okay. This is you need to be back. And I really should have just tried to drag this out with infantry and just try to delay the captures of these properties with trickles of infantry. And then this copter should have been here. It would have been much better. But yeah, I got kind of lured in here with the lander. I'm okay with this, actually. Like, this part was not the issue. It was this side. I was dancing to his tune 100% of the way on the weak side, and the only thing that saved me is the fact that I was insanely ahead from the opener, that it was almost unthrowable, and yet we didn't manage to make it exciting for the last couple of turns. But you can see that there's not really a whole lot reinforcing this because almost everything had to be allocated from this side. It's pretty crazy that he didn't bother capturing this city and was just going straight for the jugular, I suppose. But anyway, that I think wraps this one up. We made it to the end. It wasn't a super long game, but it was definitely a very eventful one with a lot of intrigue and on a very complicated map. So thank you for everybody who's made it to this part of the video. And if you're here, this is probably not the first video that you're watching of mine. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's watched this series of all the Smacky Cup games that I've been playing so far. It's really exciting to get to wrap up a series with a trophy. You know, like that's, I had no idea that I'd be able to get this far when I started reviewing all these games. Like, I think I started with the beginning of Smacky Cup 3, which was almost a year and 3 months ago. So here we are, over a year later, and we have finally completed one of our tournament runs. And that's a wrap for this one. We'll be back with future tournament games in the other tournaments as we kind of wrap up those finals, but the games on the other sides of the brackets are still kind of making their way down, so none of those games have started yet. But it feels good to get the pressure off, and we'll be able to kind of go into the rest of the games knowing that we've already got one in the bag. So with that, I'm going to go have some food with my family. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend or week whenever this ends up coming out, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.